Okay, folks, so what I'm going to do is just a little bit of code demonstration that should help you with that last one. Now, this is clearly not, a solution to the lab, but it is part of what you'll need that I would say I haven't covered. And so I want to just cover a couple of methods, um, and these are useful methods. So, I have here enter some numbers and a text box and a search button. And these methods that I want to talk about belong to the char class. And so let's kind of start here by realizing that anytime we have a text box, what comes into that text box, as you should know at this point, is a string. And so the user, even if I ask for some numbers, which would be like an int or a float or a double, even if I ask for a number, the user is going to be typing in a text box, which gives them the ability to type in a letter. So obviously the user, there's nothing there stopping them from entering some letters. And so what that means is you could ultimately store those numbers in a string. And that text box is still labeled text search. So the name of this text box is called txt search. I'm just going to update this txt numbers. Just give it a name called text numbers, and then I have to go in here. Looks like Visual Studio is pretty smart. It updated that for me. And if I were to just label result.text equals numbers, all I'm doing in this case is whatever the user types, 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, I'm just putting that back into a label. So I take in some input, that input is a string, I spit it back out. Last week, we learned how to look at a string and iterate over that string. And so if I'm looking at this, how do I loop over my string? So what would you do? How would you loop over this string called numbers?
For loop.
Okay, let's do a for loop. I'm gonna type in for tab, and this is a code snippet. And the only problem with this code snippet is that this length property is red squigglied. So what do I need to change about the length property? Okay. Yeah, we're gonna do numbers, and let's talk about this. Numbers is a string, and any string has a length property that tells me what?
How much?
How many characters are in the string. So one thing you have to remember when you're looping over a string, you are examining each character one by one. And so if it's your name, you're going to look at the first character of your name first. Then you can look at the second character and the third character. And so you did a lab, I think it was in one chapter, I don't even remember, and you counted some vowels, right? So we said int num vowels equals 0. And tell me if this is ringing a bell now. So I'm going to ask for some numbers. Well, instead of saying num vowels, maybe I'll say number... number 1. How many number ones are there? Like, is there one number one, two number ones, three number ones? Like, how many? If I'm asking the user for some number, how many number ones? And so what I'll do is I'll say if numbers sub I, again, we're kind of getting into, what do we have here? We've got a loop, we've got an if statement, and we have an array. What you have to remember, a string is an array of chars. When you're looping over a string, you can look at each letter one by one as an array of chars. So I'd say if number sub I double equals a char 1. if number sub I. The important thing to remember about this loop is it's just going to go one character at a time. It's going to start at the first character and go to the last character. So it doesn't matter how many numbers they put in. If they put in 1,000 numbers, you know, in theory, there's no, well, in theory, there is an upper limit, but it's a pretty big, right, upper limit. So you're just going to loop over all the numbers. Here we're finding out how many, why do I have this in single quotes? Because it's a character. Chars are in single quotes, strings are in double quotes. And then what I'll do is I'll just say num1s plus plus. Okay, so this allows me to inspect each value one by one, look for a specific value in that string, and here my output will be with the $sign. I'll say the number of ones is colon, put my little curlies, num1s. Okay, spit that out. And so if I say 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, the number of ones is 3, right? If I add in another 1, 1, the number of ones is 5, right? So what I've demonstrated here is that I can loop over a string. When I loop over a string, each individual character, you have an array of chars, and you can inspect each character one at a time. And when I'm inspecting here, I'm just using an if statement. Okay, and this if statement says, hey, if number sub I equals a 1, then output it. Okay. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get creative. Instead of if number sub 1, I'm going to convert all my ones. Here's my output. Instead of just kind of doing this little example, let's just say for whatever reason, I want to take the number 1 and I want to mask it, like for whatever reason, a credit card masker, right? I could say if number sub I is a 1, I will append to my label result.text plus equals, and instead of outputting a 1, I'm just going to append. That's what plus equals is going to do on a label. Keep in mind, appending is kind of like adding to a label. So here I'm going to say, okay, if the character is a 1, I'm going to hide that value from the user, right? I'm going to put the pound symbol. Otherwise, I'll say label result.text plus equals number sub I. Otherwise, I'm just going to spit out the number that's in that position. Right? Keep in mind, number sub I is just the unmasked number. Okay, so now if I kind of go here, and I have to close this before launching it again. And here's kind of the output, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And notice I masked the number 1. Okay, and so notice what I'm not doing is modifying numbers. I want to show everyone something interesting, and Scott kind of pulled me aside yesterday and he said, hey, you know, I'm working the lab in this way and I probably need to rework it in this way, because the first thing that I tried to do is I tried to change a character on number sub I. So one thing that's worth noting is that strings are what are immutable. Immutable. That just means they're a little funny. What that means is you can replace the string completely. So notice here I assign or I would even say I initialize the string to whatever the user types. And I'm allowed to completely reassign. If I want to set numbers equal to 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, okay, you are allowed to reassign strings, and that is completely legitimate. But what you can't do, what immutable means is basically changeable. You can't go into a string and just change one of its characters. What you can't do is you can't go number sub 0 equals like the number 1. Okay, so that's, I guess, the nuances behind strings. you are allowed to completely reassign a string, okay? And that's not a problem, but you can't go in and just modify a character of a string. Okay, so don't try and do this, because this doesn't work simply because strings are immutable. It's just kind of a rule of strings. They're known as immutable. You can't change them. That doesn't mean you can't reassign them. You can reassign them. You just can't. Okay, beating a dead horse here. Okay, so strings are immutable. So that's that. Now, there are two methods in the lab that I kind of mentioned, hey, look into this. And instead of my if statement being something like this, if number sub I equals a 1, check this out. I could do if char, let's talk about this. Char, what do you know about all your data types? All of your data types like int and double and char and float, right? You might remember from a prior lecture that in C#, all of those data types are also classes in C#. So there is a char data type, char, my letter equals A. Okay? And also, you could write that char your letter equals new char. And there's a syntax here that I never use, so maybe I'm getting this wrong. And put in the letter B. Actually, I guess that syntax isn't working, so I'll put in what I do know works. Point is, there's a lowercase char and there's a capital case char. What does a capital mean? It actually means something significant. That capital letters means that this identifier, my letter and your letter, are classes, and because they're classes, they have methods. So I could do stuff like your letter dot toString, your letter dot toString, and because your letter is a class, it has this ability to have these methods with it. So this char class, I want to introduce you to a couple methods. If char is digit, and I will say numbers sub I. Now notice my if statement is written a little bit differently. My if statement just changed. But what we're doing is we're inspecting number sub I. Number sub I, the first time through the loop, is sub 0. You're looking at the first character and saying, hey, is that character a digit? If it is, append a pound symbol. Now instead of just masking a 1, basically I'm saying if that character is a digit, mask it. Otherwise, you don't mask it. So let me show you kind of the result of this. Therefore, anything that's a digit, 1, 2, 3, 4, ASDF, 5, 6, 7, 8, notice I'm masking every character that is a digit. So this method returns true if what you're looking at inside these parentheses is a number. So that's pretty useful. There's also or char is white space, number sub I. So let's do this. If a character is digit, else if char is white space, number sub I. Let's do that. And let's just say if it's white space, let's just append the white space. Notice I'm gonna, whoops. Thank you, plus equals. There's this new feature in Visual Studio I'm kind of getting used to it. It's called hot reload. I'm kind of learning it. It's okay. I'm not a big fan of it yet. Okay, so now notice I'm doing one thing if it's a digit. I'm doing another thing if it's a white space. And if it's a letter, I'm keeping it. So I'm here, 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 here. Okay, so I'm keeping my white spaces. I'm converting. Now this is interesting. ASDF. Oh, I forgot my else. I'm missing one keyword here. That's giving me some funky behavior. Else. So now inside my for loop, I'm doing one thing if it's a digit, I'm doing something else if it's white space, and I'm doing something else if it's neither. So the big takeaway, of this lecture is number one, how to loop over a string, how to inspect each character of a string and determine what it is, and then based on what it is, do something with that. Okay, and very generically speaking, that's going to help you with the credit card masker that you have in your lab assignment. Cool. I'll throw this out on YouTube if you want to kind of rewatch it or whatever.
Can you put snippets too or on Discord?
Sure.